The Underground Railroad was a network of people and places that helped enslaved people escape out of the South and up through different parts of the North, but it also was much broader than that. Most people think that these Northerners were coming down out of the North and going into the South and helping people escape out. That's not necessarily the story. Most people that escaped off plantations in the South had to make that decision on their own to get up and leave and escape north. Or in some cases, they just escaped into woods next to their plantations. In some cases, they went out west. So the Underground Railroad was operating all throughout the United States. It wasn't just a place going towards Canada. The term starts sometime around the 1830s. There's beliefs that it started here, right here in the state of Ohio, right over in Ripley, Ohio, which is about 52 miles from Cincinnati, when an enslaved person named Tice Davids was escaping across the river. He escapes and his owner comes chasing after him. He quickly cannot find him and says he must have escaped on an underground railroad. The impact that the Underground Railroad had on the Civil War was very large. Enslaved people escaping across the Ohio River and the other places that they escaped reached almost 100,000 people by the time the Civil War began. Now that number could be bigger. That's just an estimate that historians and scholars use today. But as those enslaved people are escaping, it plays a very big part in why the South secedes from the Union, because these enslaved people are worth a significant amount of money and really driving the economics of this country. So this law that's passed in 1850 that includes the fugitive slave law, this for the first time makes Northerners have to help in recapturing of fugitive slaves. If they were requested to help and they refused to, they faced heavy penalties. So this law went a long way in bringing the Civil War to the forefront. Northerners were not too happy about this. Many that had no opinion of the institution of slavery, now that they're forced to take part in this, are now starting to speak out against the institution of slavery. Here at the Freedom Center, we talk about three main themes: courage, cooperation, and perseverance. And these were three things that almost every abolitionist at that time had those qualities. When an abolitionist stood up and took a stand against the institution of slavery, they were putting not only themselves at risk, but they were also putting their families at risk. Because at any time, your neighbors may not support your involvement in this movement. Abolitionists faced their houses being burnt down all across the country. They faced heavy penalties and fines. So stepping up and taking this stand to help someone else that you've never met before was a big risk. When you came across the Ohio River, most people thought that this was their final route. Reaching Ohio was where they were going to find true freedom. But in fact, many people quickly found out that this was not their end of their journey. The power of the Underground Railroad is not just the overall story, it's the individual stories. It was the people that made the decision to get up and leave on their own, risk everything. Most of these people were never going to see their families again, and they knew they were taking that step to reach freedom. One thing about the Underground Railroad that most people don't know about is it wasn't always successful. In fact, the majority of people that tried to escape didn't make it. But the power of the Underground Railroad was every time someone left a plantation or a home or somewhere where they were enslaved, it opened up the door for the next person to dream about freedom.
Well, John Parker was a real person in Ripley, Ohio. He was originally an enslaved African American. He tried to escape numerous times and ended up buying his freedom in his adult years. He had a family and he lived down near the Ohio River. And we know stories about him being so impassioned about other enslaved African Americans that he would go over into Kentucky and help bring enslaved individuals back to the Ohio side and on to freedom. Well, artifacts are always an interesting thing at museums because they come to you in a variety of ways. So when we first opened in 2004, we would find artifacts, we would find objects, we would find documents that were just left at the doors where people wanted to bring things in. We often have things come by mail. but we don't have a lot of permanent collections, a lot of collections that we own, simply because the Underground Railroad was a covert situation, that people weren't keeping records of things in a lot of cases. They weren't keeping memorabilia per se. And the things that were kept from the slave era were often given to historical societies, which were around during that point in time. And so since we just came in 2004, we must rely mostly on things that people give us, family members give us, or things that we borrow from other older historical societies and museums. There are a variety of ways to determine if something is authentic. A lot of what we do is we look at provenance, which is where an artifact came from. So a lot of times people will say, well, I got this from my grandmother who lived in this city, or I got this from so-and-so that was on this plantation. And so you can go back through records and journals and find some of that information. Other times we rely on auction houses and official professional appraisers who have done a lot of that research and can see, based on how old things are, kind of the science of it. I think overall our main goal at the Freedom Center is to make sure that people become free everywhere in the world. And so we use the Underground Railroad and we use historical slavery as a foundation to talk about what is going on in the world today. And so as we bring awareness to people, we inform them about things they didn't know, as we give them more in-depth educational information about historical slavery and contemporary issues, we then ask them to become advocates. We ask them to become modern-day abolitionists and work to free everyone in the world. If you would like more information about the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, please call 513-333-7500 or visit our website at www.freedomcenter.org.